I thought love meant forever, until the night my husband chose someone else while I stood right there, forgotten. It started with a phone call. A single, unexpected ring in the dead of night. The moment I saw the name flashing on his screen, I felt my stomach twist into knots. Elena. A name I had long buried. A woman I had thought was part of his past. His ex. The one who had almost destroyed him before we met. I hesitated before shaking him awake. "Jake," I whispered, my voice tight. "Your phone's ringing." He groggily turned over, blinking at the screen. The moment his eyes landed on the name, something changed in his face. His sleepy expression vanished, replaced by something sharp. Panic. He shot up, snatching the phone from my hand. "I need to take this," he mumbled, already swinging his legs over the side of the bed. I sat there, frozen, as he disappeared into the bathroom. My heart pounded in my chest, a silent war between trust and suspicion waging inside me. This wasn't just some random call. I could feel it in my bones. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. When he finally returned, his face was pale, his hands trembling. "Who was that?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. His jaw clenched. "It was nothing," he said too quickly. "Just an old friend who needed to talk." A lie. I knew at the moment the words left his lips. I wanted to push. I wanted to demand the truth. But something about the way he looked at me, almost guilty, almost afraid, made my throat close up. Instead, I forced a smile, pretending to believe him. But I knew better. That night, Jake held me in his arms, but his mind was somewhere else. And for the first time in our 5-year marriage, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The next morning, everything was worse. He barely met my eyes. He avoided conversation. His hands shook when he picked up his coffee. And then, just as I was about to press him, his phone rang again. "Elena." And this time, he didn't hesitate before answering. Right in front of me. That's when I knew. Something was about to shatter. And my world would never be the same again. Looking back, should have seen the signs. Jake and I had been married for 5 years, and in those 5 years, I had built my world around him. I wasn't just his wife, I was his best friend, his biggest supporter, the woman who picked him up when life knocked him down. We met at a time when he was at his lowest. A bad breakup, a shattered heart, and a future that looked uncertain. And then, I came along, a breath of fresh air, someone who made him laugh again. He always told me I saved him. That without me, he wouldn't have found the strength to move forward. I believed him. Jake was the kind of man who made you feel safe. He had this quiet strength, a way of making the world feel smaller when he held me. He wasn't just my husband, he was my home. Or at least, he used to be. In the beginning, our marriage was perfect. We shared late-night talks, spontaneous road trips, and whispered dreams about our future. Every morning, he kissed my forehead before leaving for work. Every night, he held me close, as if I was the most precious thing in his life. I never questioned his love for me. Until now. That phone call changed something. Suddenly, Jake wasn't the same man I had built my life with. He was distant, distracted. He left early for work, came home late, and when I spoke, it felt like he wasn't really listening. I tried to brush it off. "He's just stressed," I told myself. "Work has been overwhelming lately. It's nothing." But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Because Jake never ignored me. He never pulled away like this. And he had never, in 5 years, looked at me with guilt in his eyes. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to trust him the way I always had. But the truth was creeping in, no matter how hard I tried to push it away. And the truth had a name. Elena. I didn't know much about her, only that she had been the love of Jake's life before she broke him. He never talked about what really happened between them, only that it was messy, painful, and something he never wanted to relive. I don't think about her anymore, he had once told me. But now, she was back. And suddenly, my husband was acting like a stranger. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence. That maybe she had called him for closure, or something harmless. But the way Jake reacted, the way his hands shook when her name appeared on his screen, told me this wasn't over. She wasn't just a part of his past. She was back in his present. And I had no idea where that left me. I told myself I wouldn't snoop. That I would trust Jake the way I always had. But when someone from the past resurfaces and your husband starts acting like a ghost of himself, trust doesn't come easy. The next few days felt like living with a stranger. Jake became distant, his usual warmth replaced by cold detachment. He wasn't cruel, just absent. He barely spoke at dinner, barely touched me at night. He was physically there but emotionally gone. And then there was his phone. He never used to be secretive about it. It would sit on the coffee table or nightstand without a second thought. But now? He kept it close, guarded. If I walked into the room while he was texting, he would lock the screen instantly. Every time it buzzed, my stomach twisted. Because I knew. It was her. One night, as he slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I could feel his body next to mine, feel the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. But I didn't feel like his wife anymore. I needed to know the truth. Heart pounding, I turned my head to look at him. His phone was on the nightstand, just inches from my reach. I hesitated. This wasn't me. I wasn't the type to go through someone's phone. But the man lying next to me wasn't the Jake I married. And I had to know why. Slowly, I reached over, careful not to make a sound. My fingers wrapped around the phone, and I pulled it close, my breath caught in my throat. I pressed the screen. Locked. Of course. But then, as if the universe wanted me to see, the phone lit up with a notification. A message. From Elena. I miss you. Please, Jake. I don't have much time. The air left my lungs. My hands started shaking. What did she mean? What didn't she have time for? And why was she texting my husband in the middle of the night, telling him she missed him? I swallowed the lump in my throat and set the phone back down, my mind spinning. There was no denying it now. Something was happening. Something Jake wasn't telling me. And suddenly, the walls of our marriage, the ones I had thought were unbreakable, were starting to crack. The next morning, I watched him closely. The way he barely looked at me as he got dressed. The way he grabbed his phone the second he woke up, reading her message before erasing it. I wanted to scream. To demand answers. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I waited. And later that afternoon, when he said he had to run an errand, I followed him. I told myself I wasn't crazy. That maybe this was all a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew better. And when I saw where he went, when I saw who he was with, every last bit of hope inside me shattered. Jake wasn't just talking to Elena. He was meeting her. And from the way he held her hands, from the way she looked at him with tears in her eyes, I knew I wasn't imagining things. I was losing my husband. And he was letting it happen. I stood frozen outside the cafe, my heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. Through the glass window, I could see them, Jake and Elena, sitting across from each other. He wasn't just meeting her. He wasn't just catching up with an old friend. He was holding her hands. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't a casual meeting. This wasn't some meaningless conversation. There was something between them, something I thought had died years ago. But I was wrong. I had spent 5 years building a life with Jake. 5 years believing we were unshakable. And yet, here he was, his fingers gently wrapped around hers, his face filled with an emotion I hadn't seen in a long time. I felt sick. I wanted to march inside, to demand answers. To scream, to cry, to make him see me. But I couldn't move. Instead, I stood there like a ghost, watching as the man I loved unraveled everything we had built. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife deeper, Elena started crying. I saw the way Jake squeezed her hands tighter, the way he leaned in, whispering something I couldn't hear. And then I saw the worst part. The look in his eyes. Not guilt. Not regret. Love. A love that had no business still existing. A love that should have ended the moment he married me. I felt my knees go weak. My breath hitched in my throat. Was I imagining things? Had I been blind this whole time? Because the man sitting across from her wasn't the same man who had been sleeping next to me every night. No, this man belonged to her. I turned away, forcing myself to breathe, to think. I could still walk inside. I could still demand answers. I could still fight for my marriage. But as I stood there, a painful realization settled deep in my chest. What was there left to fight for? Jake had already made his choice. And it wasn't me. I walked away, my vision blurred with unshed tears. I had come looking for the truth. And I had found it. But the truth hurt far worse than any lie ever could. For the first time in my marriage, I wasn't just doubting my husband. I was doubting us. That night, when Jake came home, I was sitting on the couch, waiting. He hesitated in the doorway, his eyes flickering toward me like he could feel the shift in the air. "Hey," he said, forcing a small smile. "I got caught up at work. Sorry I'm late." Lie. I stared at him, my heart twisting. How easily it came to him now, how effortlessly he fed me lies while smelling like another woman's perfume. I opened my mouth, ready to confront him, ready to demand the truth. But I stopped myself. If he had already chosen her, then what was the point? Instead, I simply nodded. Okay. Jake's brows furrowed. He had been expecting a fight. But instead, I gave him silence. Because the moment I saw him with her, something inside me had changed. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry in front of him. No. I was going to make my own choice. And this time, it wouldn't be about him. It would be about me. For the next few days, I kept my silence. Jake thought I didn't know. Thought his lies were holding up, that I was still the same woman who trusted him blindly. But I wasn't. I was watching. Every time his phone buzzed and he turned away to check it, every time he came home late, smelling like a different world, her world, I took note. I was done pretending. And then, just when I thought I had seen the worst of it, fate decided to break me all over again. It happened on a Friday. Jake had left early, saying he had meetings. I didn't believe him. So, I followed him. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, maybe another cafe meeting, another hushed conversation filled with stolen glances. But I wasn't prepared for what I found. I parked a few blocks away and watched as he pulled up to a small apartment complex. Elena was waiting for him. And then, he hugged her. Not a casual, friendly embrace. A lingering, intimate hug. Like he was home. I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, my heart slamming against my ribs. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. As Jake pulled away, Elena pressed a hand to her stomach. And suddenly, I saw it. The slight swell beneath her dress. My blood turned to ice. No. No, it couldn't be. But then Jake did something that shattered the last bit of hope I had left. He placed a hand over hers, over her stomach. And he smiled. A genuine, breathtaking smile. A smile I hadn't seen in months. I choked back a sob, my whole body trembling. I wanted to run. To scream. To make him see what he was doing to me. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, watching the man I had loved for 5 years fall apart in front of me. And suddenly, I knew. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just a moment of weakness. Jake had a new life. And I wasn't part of it. I had spent so much time wondering if he would choose me. But the truth was, he already had. And it wasn't me. I don't remember how I got home. The drive back was a blur of tears, shaking hands, and a hollow ache spreading through my chest like wildfire. Every part of me wanted to wake up from this nightmare. But this was real. Jake had been lying. Not just about Elena, but about everything. And now, she was carrying his child. I sat in the dark, staring at the front door, waiting. My mind ran through every possible scenario, what I would say, how he would react. Would he admit it? Would he lie again? Or worse, would he look me in the eye and not feel guilty at all? The door finally creaked open around 9 p.m. I stayed seated, watching as Jake stepped inside, loosening his tie. He didn't notice me at first. He tossed his keys on the counter, running a tired hand through his hair. Like he had nothing to hide. Like he hadn't just destroyed me. I let out a slow breath, my voice eerily calm. "How was your day?" Jake froze. His back straightened, like some instinct warned him that something wasn't right. Slowly, he turned to face me. It was fine. Just work, you know. Lie. I nodded, tilting my head. Work, huh? He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Yeah. Long meetings. I felt my hands curl into fists. That's strange, I murmured. Because I could have sworn I saw you somewhere else today. His face drained of color. Gotcha. I stood up, my legs steady despite the storm raging inside me. Tell me, Jake, since when do business meetings involve hugging your pregnant ex? His mouth opened, but no words came out. For a split second, I saw it, the sheer, raw panic flashing across his face. Then, just as quickly, he tried to recover. It's not what you think. I laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Not what I think. So you weren't holding her? You weren't touching her stomach like she's carrying your child? He exhaled sharply, running both hands over his face. It's complicated. Complicated? My voice cracked. Are you seriously saying that to your wife? The woman you've been lying to for weeks? He finally met my eyes. I didn't want you to find out this way. I let out a humorless laugh. Oh. How were you planning to tell me, Jake? Before or after your baby was born? He flinched, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret flicker in his gaze. But regret wasn't enough. Not anymore. Say it, I whispered, my voice shaking. Say the words, Jake. He looked down, his jaw clenched. Seconds passed. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I still love her. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I stumbled back, a sharp gasp leaving my lips. What? He squeezed his eyes shut. I never stopped loving her. The pain was unbearable, like a knife twisting deeper and deeper. Then why the hell did you marry me? My voice was barely above a whisper. Jake finally looked up, his eyes red, filled with something I couldn't name. Because I thought I could move on, he admitted. I thought I could love you the way you deserved. And I did, I do, but when she came back. I held up a hand, shaking my head. Don't. Just don't. My entire world had just collapsed, and all he could do was sit there and tell me it wasn't enough? That I wasn't enough? I took a step back. Then another. Jake reached out. Please, don't. I shook my head. Don't touch me. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence. Then I said the words that sealed everything. I'm leaving. Jake's face twisted. What? I'm done, Jake, I whispered, my voice eerily calm. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. Not when he wasn't worth them anymore. You don't have to go, he said, voice cracking. We can figure something out. I laughed. A hollow, shattered sound. Figure something out? I stepped forward, looking him dead in the eyes. Jake, you have a family now. But I'm not part of it. For the first time that night, I saw fear in his expression. But it was too late. He had already lost me. I don't remember packing. One moment, I was standing in the living room, staring at Jake as he struggled to form words, to fix this, and the next, I was stuffing clothes into a suitcase. He hovered near the doorway, watching me like a man who had just realized his world was burning down. But it was too late to save it. Where will you go? His voice was hoarse. I zipped the suitcase shut, not looking at him. I don't know. A beat of silence. Then, please. Stay. We can figure this out. I exhaled sharply and turned to face him. Jake, there is no we anymore. You chose her. Maybe not in words, maybe not all at once, but you did. His hands clenched at his sides. That's not true. I love you. I shook my head, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. No, Jake. You loved the idea of me. The woman who helped you heal, the woman who made you laugh when you thought you couldn't again. But deep down? My voice wavered. I was never the one. Tears welled in his eyes. That's not fair. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Fair? I scoffed. You had an affair. You're having a baby with her. You've been lying to me for weeks, months, maybe. And you think this is about fairness? His shoulders slumped. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, I whispered, gripping the handle of my suitcase, you did. And then I walked past him. Each step felt heavier than the last, like my feet were sinking into concrete, like my body was trying to tell me this was wrong. But it wasn't. The only wrong thing had been staying when my heart was already shattered. I reached for the doorknob, but just as I turned it, Jake's voice stopped me. Do you ever think, he murmured, that if she never came back, we would have been okay? I let my fingers slip from the doorknob, my heart aching at his words. If Elena had never returned. If she had stayed buried in the past, where she belonged. Would Jake and I have lasted? Would we have grown old together, laughing at how we ever doubted our love? I closed my eyes. And then I told him the truth. No, Jake, I whispered. Because if you truly loved me, nothing could have brought her back into your life. I opened the door. I stepped out. And this time, I didn't look back. I drove for hours, my mind blank, my heart hollow. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I needed to disappear. By the time I checked into a small roadside motel, exhaustion had settled deep into my bones. I dropped my suitcase on the floor and collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. It was over. 5 years. 5 years of love, laughter, and promises of forever, gone in a matter of days. I should have felt relief. But all I felt was emptiness. I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over Jake's contact. For a fleeting second, I wanted to call him. To hear his voice one last time. But then I remembered the way he held her. The way he touched her stomach like it was the most precious thing in the world. And I deleted his number. No more second chances. No more hoping he would wake up one day and realize it was always supposed to be me. I shut my eyes, a single tear sliding down my temple. Tomorrow, I would start over. Tomorrow, I would begin again. And this time, I wouldn't need Jake to survive. I would save myself.